Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight is a very special night. Tonight, I intend on reading from a specific author who has proven herself to be exceptional. Truly, she will be my masterpiece soon, for she will see such eternal pain, that wisdom of woe. Before I start reading, though, I've been made aware of certain patients' insolence in my asylum. If I desire you to be a part of my heralds, I will come to you. I do not enjoy being told what to do. I happen, in fact, have a very contrary response to someone trying to control me in any way. I am sure to find acolytes wherever I look, but those that become aggressive with their desire to be a part of my clan tend to aggravate me. I feel I must punish such a sycophant with the sweet ambrosia of anguish. While I desire many to experience my intention upon this world, I will not be pressured to make you a part of my devotees. Threats of danger does not faze me. Try to impress me with your evil, and I will laugh, for your blasphemy is clear. You who dare try to be upon my stage uninvited are the impostors of true malevolence. You will never be able to reach that beautiful agony of such wretched depravity, for you are just a charlatan of true rapturous pandemonium. Those usurpers and deceivers think they understand what we are, what this is. They believe they can force their way to being apostles of the abyss, to serve the angel of pestilence. Pathetic heretics. I alone select my disciples to join me in the sadistic heavens of perdition. Only I choose who to show the ecstasy of purgatory. Now, for the rest of you, you may have been brought here against your will, or you may have voluntarily committed yourself. But while you are here, allow me to entertain. You certainly can't leave, at least for now. While you are here, allow me to introduce myself. I am Beyond 5150, the impatient of this asylum, and I will be your sovereign of the spine-tingling, your master of the macabre, your purveyor of the petrifying. I am your god of all things horrifying. I will tell you stories you will wish you had never heard. Try as you might, you won't find your happy place here, so welcome your current circumstances and just accept their hair rising on your neck, your chills and goosebumps. Oh, and there is no milk and cookies. Now, sit back, relax, and wait for the doctor to call you back. While I was making my rounds this morning, checking on all of my patients and reviewing security footage to determine any punishments as may be necessary, I did happen to come across a story. Interesting one, to say the least, and I think I'm going to start this one. I don't know who the author is, unfortunately, but clearly whomever had written it understood something quite uniquely, noticed something that the rest did not. Either way, it is a well-written story, and so we shall begin. For some context, I'm a horror narrator. Creepypastas, no sleep, urgent legends. If it's scary, I'll read it. I hover right around 50 subscribers, so By no means am I a large channel, but that's okay with me. I read for me. It acts almost like a type of therapy. I suffer from PTSD, depression, and a host of medical issues, and the stories have become an escape. While I read mostly for myself, I do have a small group of friends who enjoy hearing me read, so twice weekly I host live streams on my channel. It's a little twisted, but reading terrifying things brings me peace. It reassures me that my reality could always be worse. Well, that was until recently, at least. A few weeks ago, I was scrolling through Reddit and looking for new stories, and I came across some author. Her story was strange and poorly edited, but I was getting closer and closer to my stream start time, so I went ahead and shot her a message. She was more than enthusiastic to have me read her story. Little did I know that was the beginning of the end of my YouTube career. That night's stream was about as normal as it could be. My friends were joking and laughing in the comments. The dogs didn't bark. Even my kids managed to be quiet the whole time. Truth be told, I read her story, but I'm not entirely sure anyone actually noticed it. It was nothing more than a space filler for me, something to prolong the time I got to spend reading and having fun with my friends. I don't mean to be rude, but her story was utterly unremarkable. It was there. It existed, but it wasn't the type of story that causes great fanfare or helps you gain subscribers. I didn't notice her in the stream. She surely didn't comment. It's not hard for me to notice a newcomer amongst all my friends. She and her story just completely slipped my mind until a few days after my stream. She sent me a message telling me how great the stream was and how she had listened to the streams I recorded in the past over and over again on a loop. It was kind of strange and slightly uncomfortable. But I just figured she had been excited to have her story read. I responded, and I told her I was glad she enjoyed my narration and thanked her for letting me read the story. I brushed off the message and went to bed. I can't say my sleep was restless, but I can't say I'm not a fan of being woken up by frantic phone calls from my friends. Apparently, at some point while I was watching the inside of my eyelids, this writer decided to start posting letters to me on Reddit. My friends are kind of like me and just have no life, so it really didn't take long for them to see the letters and them to start calling and texting me to warn me about them. It was like they were taking turns bombarding me until they knew I was safe. After responding to the texts and returning missed phone calls, I sat down in front of my laptop, trying to work up the courage to see what she had written. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end as I read her rambling about the voices in her head, how excessively she'd been listening to me. She rambled on about seeing some sort of demon and quoted Disney movies while rambling about murder. I didn't even have time to process before a new message notification popped up. It was this girl. She had messaged me again and sent me a new story asking me to read it. Out of pure morbid curiosity, I skimmed the story, and not only was it horribly written, but it followed no plot line. It just made no sense at all. Not wanting to be rude and then getting worried that she might be like a serial killer or something, I sent her a message back. I told her as gently as I could that I thought her story needed some work. I said she just needed to really edit it and flesh it out because it was far too short to narrate. I hoped deeply she would be offended and just never message me again, but I was extremely wrong. She started bombarding me with links to stories she had written that were longer, but so much worse. They were basically incoherent ramblings and the world's longest run-on sentences. Everyone makes mistakes. That there's bound to be errors in writing. It's just a thing that happens, and sometimes those errors make it through the editing process without being caught, but that really wasn't the case here. It was like someone tried to write a creepypasta using predictive text feature on a phone. After the fourth installment of what can be only described as a dumpster fire of a story, I decided to take the high road, or the coward's way out, depending on how you look at it. I just started to ignore her. To be honest, blocking her didn't really even cross my mind at that point. I wish it would have, though. I was already stressed enough without her adding to it. We were just right there in the middle of its worldwide pandemic. I just fresh out of a divorce, and I had an upcoming trip to visit my family. And the last thing I wanted or needed was some crazy chick obsessed and stalking me. Things went quiet for a few days. If she had been listening to my streams, she knew I was planning a trip, and I think for once she had a coherent thought and probably figured I wasn't responding because of my trip. In reality, while I was busy, I was also actively avoiding Reddit and YouTube in the hopes she would find someone new to cling to. When I came home from my trip, I was kind of in rough shape, and then somehow my internet was knocked out while I was gone, so I had to cancel several streams, making my total time away from YouTube and Reddit roughly 3 weeks. It was 3 weeks of pure bliss. Yesterday, I was finally able to stream again. As I was setting up the stream and it was counting down, she popped into chat. My friends were all painfully aware of who she was, and so we were all waiting with bated breath, trying to anticipate what she would do. It wasn't long before she started rambling and calling me master. She would make up these stories about my channel while challenging the people who actually wrote those stories that she was trying to imitate. She started demanding I read her letters, saying her demons demanded it. She started fetishizing me, and it didn't take but a moment for my friends to speak up and call her out on being so creepy. She went quiet, and I managed to finish my stream mostly undisturbed. Once the stream was finished, I popped into a group video chat, and that's where I learned about her most recent posts. I had been reading. My friends took it upon themselves to conduct some research and found where she had been posting these letters she demanded that I read. She'd taken a story written by one of my friends who frequently writes for my channel, and she completely bastardized it. She rambled on about her and her demons feasting on my friends' bodies. She just went into detail about me, how she would keep me safe from her demons, and talked about torturing the various writers who worked with me in the past. She swore I promised to read more of her stories, but I never made anyone that promise. She talked about how with each passing stream she grew more and more angry when she didn't hear her stories. She went on about one of her many demons and how she questioned if holding him back was really the best idea after all. At the end of the post, she tagged me and left a very thinly veiled threat in the hopes of getting me to read her stories. My friends could see the look of just pure horror on my face as I finished reading her message. I think they were just as creeped out as I was. A few of them cracked jokes trying to lighten the mood, while a couple of others made sure I told my roommate what was happening and I had a plan in case she actually snapped. Before going to bed, I carefully made sure all the doors and windows were locked, and the pistol I kept in my nightstand was fully loaded. I tucked my kids in and checked on my roommate and went to bed. When I woke up this morning, everything seemed normal. I got up and started towards my kitchen to make my morning cup of coffee. When I walked by my front door, I noticed a small slip of paper peeking out from under it, almost like someone had tried to slide it under the door. When I picked it up, it revealed a crudely drawn picture of a tall, dark figure and what may have been a disemboweled body in its hands. The paper was wrinkled with this dark, red, sticky droplets. It was right then when I just gave up and just called the police. Since it appeared someone had not actually been inside my house, they deemed my call low priority and took their time getting to my house. While I was waiting for them, I decided to grab my gun and then check the outside of the house. Underneath my bedroom window, I found an old aerosol can and then some used matches. There were scorch marks on the paneling, almost as if someone had tried to light the vinyl siding on fire. In between the scorch marks, there were pictures of knives and axes drawn in what looked like blood. I ran back to the house just to be greeted by my kids. They had just woken up and was wondering where my roommate was. It was his day off, and he usually makes it a point to cook the kids breakfast. I was heading towards his room when I heard the police knocking on the door. I quickly ushered them inside and started to explain what happened while showing them the messages and comments. The officers stared at me with blank expressions as I showed them the screenshots, but it wasn't until I showed them the side of the house that they started to get concerned. They questioned me extensively about the possibility of maybe my roommates or kids were playing a prank on me. I assured them it wasn't the kids or even my roommate, and then even mentioned we hadn't even seen him all morning. The officers took a report and photos while assuring they would send someone out to collect evidence from the sighting. They told me to try and get a hold of my roommate and said that if I didn't hear from him that evening, to give them a call back. While they were walking to their patrol car, one of the officers turned to me and suggested I pack the kids up and run to the hardware store to get a security system. Well, that was all it took for me to take that drive to the store. With the pandemic, money was tight, but I bought the most state-of-the-art system the store had. Things had already escalated far beyond what I could ever imagine, and there was no way I was going to risk my kids or my roommate's safety. It had alarms and cameras, and it would even connect to my phone and send me notifications should any of the doors or windows be opened. The kids were antsy, so we rushed home, and as we were pulling into the driveway, I noticed the mailman was making his way up the street. I got the kids inside and was making my way down the driveway when the mailman pulled up to my mailbox. I must say, I say it must because all I can remember is just this large flash and an ear-shattering boom. The force of the explosion was so strong, it literally knocked me on my ass. I sat there in shock, watching tatters of mail and streamers of blood and organs dance all around me. I didn't even hear the sirens as the police came to the house. After being checked out by the paramedics in the back of an ambulance, the police took me inside my house and then started asking me questions. Admittedly, I didn't have any answers, but it didn't stop them from asking. I brought up my stalker and missing roommate. At that point, I was basically pleading with them that there was no way all of this was a coincidence. My hands shook as I stared at the phone in my hands. I knew she had done this, and I needed to convince the officers that she's the cause of all of this. While showing the officers the posts my stalker made about me, I noticed the dates. Her final threatening message was posted 2 days before my last stream, and I hadn't even seen the post. Could it have been that she was making good on those threats? Did me not reading her stories and letters push her over the edge? When I clicked back to her profile, a message popped up. Without reading it, I just handed my phone to the police officer closest to me. The officer turned pale, and within moments of reading the message, he started dry heaving and had to leave the room. As my phone was passed from officer to officer, each one had a unique but equally horrified reaction. I still don't know what was in that message, and I don't want to. The police, they took my phone and laptop and then put me and my kids up in a hotel a few towns over. After everything that had happened, I was super antsy, so I decided to walk to the store next to the hotel. While I was there, I picked up a cheap pay-as-you-go phone so I can contact my family and let them know that me and the kids were safe. I downloaded that Reddit app so I could see if my stalker had posted anything new, and so maybe I could be prepared in case something happened. She posted a picture of my roommate's wallet about an hour ago. That's what made me decide to document this. I don't think I'm going to see my roommate again, alive at least, and I want there to be a solid paper trail should anything happen to me. As I was finishing typing everything out, I decided to check the Reddit again, and this time there was a picture of my hotel room door. I think she's watching me now, because right as I looked up from the screen, my phone started buzzing wildly in my hands. Message after message came through with no pause. Panicking, I just threw the phone to the bed and then started weighing out my options. I managed to pop the grate off the air vent. It looks like it goes to the room next door. I convinced the kids to crawl inside and then made them promise to crawl to the next room if they heard anything bad happen. I turned off the heat and the air to the room so that way nothing would happen, and then loosely screwed the grate back on. I'm on the phone with the police now, and thank God that this hotel still had old corded phones in the rooms. I hope I can update this soon, but if I can't, know I went out fighting, and always be aware of who you're talking to online. Don't be afraid to block someone, and always trust your gut. And that was the end of that. As you can see, it's definitely quite well done. I at least believe. Okay, let's see who's here. We have CC, Casey, April, Dustin, Carnage. Who else? I know there was more. Okay, Psionic Valkyrie. I'm not sure who that one is, the username, but welcome. Queen of Chaos, welcome as well. And Fear, welcome to see you. Anyone else? Anybody else? Oh, hey Chris. Good to see you as well. Just looking through. Anyone else? Okay, I think we got everybody there. Well, welcome everyone to the stream, and tonight we're going to have some interesting stories. The author tonight we're going to be focusing on is Casey Were Alien. I've read many of her stories before, and we'll be going over many of those stories again, but these stories are quite well written, and I do hope you enjoy. Not that I care that much, but I have to spread the vision to all. Okay, so first story. It's titled My Sunshine. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine, I whispered as I kissed your hair. You always look so peaceful, especially like on still nights like this. It reminds me when we first met. I was walking through the park on a fresh spring day. Birds sang softly and the fresh blossoms seemed to turn, hoping to just catch a glimpse of your radiance. Sun, it reflected off your golden hair, and your eyes were pools of blue wonder. I don't think you noticed me right away, but I remember staring at you, just completely awestruck. It was like my world became whole the moment I saw you on that broken park path. Our first date was even better. We went to that cute little cafe up the road. You ordered a vanilla coffee and a croissant. Even when the pastry crumbles on your chin, you were still the most radiant girl I had ever met. You really were my sunshine, the light I'd been waiting for. Things were so amazing, the little places we'd meet, the memories we shared. I would have given the world just to see the twinkle in your eyes when you smiled, and I did. I quit my job and left school to be closer to you, to have more moments with you. Every chance I got, I tried to spend time with you. Even though you worked long hours at the second-hand shop, I tried to stop by every day. The more time we spent together, it was like the more you glowed. I remember asking why you loved the thrift shop and why you worked there even though the pay wasn't great. You said you loved the idea of everything having a second chance, that the idea of even a chipped cup can find a loving home was reassuring to you. You always had the most beautiful and pure outlook on life. I remember how excited you were when I started having flowers delivered to your work. You went on and on about your secret admirer and how shocked you were that they knew your favorite flowers. It's so cute, you acting coy and pretending you didn't know it was me. I guess that's why it was so earth-shattering when we went to the movies on our anniversary. I was a few people behind you in line like usual when he walked up. He was dark and brooding, a disgusting contrast to my sunshine. My sunshine! I thought you were sure to tell him off and push him away, but no. Oh no, right there in front of me! My sunshine grabbed his hand and kissed him. You kissed him! Right in front of me on our anniversary! I thought of confronting you, but nothing I would do would stop the bleak sobs escaping from my lips. As I was leaving, I saw you through my tears. You looked confused. But then a look of shocked recognition fell upon your face. It was that night, sobbing alone in my bleak apartment, I decided you needed a second chance. You were my sunshine and my chipped cup. I would never give up on you. So the next morning, with eyes red and puffy, I made my way to your thrift shop. I browsed like I normally did, but this time I found a true treasure. It was a faded leather antique trunk. This trunk I decided would be our memory box, so we could always hold on to our precious memories and keep them safe. You're always as beautiful. It's like you had taken the time to impress me. I loved the way your heels matched your skirt. As I was checking out, you decided to ask me about what happened in the theater the night before. I knew you'd tell me in your time, so all I said was I had got upsetting news. You told me you hoped everything would be okay, and right then I knew it would be because I still had my sunshine. Even if that man had been someone you once knew once upon a time. I knew I was the only one in your heart. You were so shocked when I came to pick you up from work. You couldn't hide your screams of excitement. You were so excited you were shaking. I had to help you into the car, and I never expected you'd be so excited you'd start crying. You kept asking where we were going, and I just kept telling you it was a surprise. You must have been so excited because you started crying even harder. When we got to the park, I led you to a picnic. I carefully laid out your favorite flowers and croissants from the cafe where we had our first date. I even had an album filled with all the pictures I managed to sneak of you. When you turned around, there I was, down on one knee with a ring. You screamed and started sobbing again. You called me a freak. You said I was crazy. You tried to say we had never been on a date, that you didn't even know my name. You turned to run down the path where we first met, and I knew it was a test. You must have wanted to see how much I loved you, how far I would go for you, so I gave chase. Your heel broke as you went running down the path, and you stumbled. Do you know how hard it was getting the blood out of your golden hair? How hard it was getting you to my car? I would never let anything happen to you again, so once I got you home and got you cleaned up, I put some pillows and blankets in the trunk you sold me. I would keep you safe. The trunk didn't lock, but it didn't matter. You never made another noise after hitting your head on that rock. Well, to be honest, you didn't move much either, but that doesn't matter. You did start to smell after a few days, and your skin started to change. Luckily, I read online that wax does wonders for the skin, so each night I would take you out of the trunk for our romantic candlelit dinners, and I would gently rub the wax into your skin. It's a great thing I did, because it turns out wax is a great filler for decaying skin. I have to say, I love nothing more than laying with you on nights like this, stroking your soft hair and looking deeply into what's left of your eyes. No matter what happens, you'll always be my sunshine. It doesn't even matter that I don't know your name. Good evening, and that was the end of that story. Obviously well written. Very well written. Oh, I see we have AJ. Hey, you doing? Glad to see you. And Mia, good to see you as well. All right, so we're going to move on to our next story. Let's see. I think we'll pick this one. Yes. Now, before I get going, I wanted to let you all know that down in the description is all the information you need to either support the channel, or if you wish to support the authors, I always make sure that there's a link down below for their Reddit pages. So please let them know how well their writing is, because they definitely deserve it. They have to be a part of my family here at the asylum, and giving them some positive self-image does wonders for their treatments. The title of this story is I've been sleepwalking lately, and tonight I'm turning myself in to the police. Missing: James Turner. Height: 5 foot 8 inches. Hair color: brown. Eye color: blue. Weight: 200 pounds. Age at the time of disappearance: 28. I kept reading the words on the flyer over and over in my head. I never thought I'd be spending my second wedding anniversary looking for my husband. He had disappeared a few days before, and the police were out of leads. I was spending my days and nights searching and putting up posters. Things had been rough between us lately. He had lost his job and money was tight. But it wasn't anything to run away over. He didn't have any enemies, so no one who would want him to disappear. He had left late that fateful night to help his friend whose truck broke down. I was getting ready for bed, and when I woke up in the morning, he wasn't next to me. I called his friend, who said James should have been home hours ago. And he started to drive the trek to our house, searching for James as I called the police. It only took them a few hours to find his truck abandoned in a parking lot. He loved that truck. He he never would have left the keys in the ignition and the doors open. When the police told me they found it, they didn't think I could hear the radios buzzing about the talk of blood in and around the truck. I think the officer saw my face drain of color because they quickly turned the radios off. They assured me they would find my husband, that I shouldn't worry. That night I laid awake in bed wondering where we went wrong, why he would leave. At some point I must have drifted off because suddenly I was dreaming about him. He laid on the ground, his shoulder-length hair lying almost like a halo in a pool of blood. He was gasping for air, and as he reached for me with shaking hand, I woke up. Panicking and drenched in sweat, I made my way to the light switch. As soon as I saw the blood on the switch and where it was dry and crusting on my hands, I dropped to the floor sobbing. I showered, inspecting myself for wounds, and found nothing. I spent hours cleaning the blood from my walls and bed. Exhausted, I fell back asleep, and when I woke up in the morning, I managed to convince myself it was just a dream. I spent most of that day at the police station answering questions. They asked me if he had any debts, maybe some angry former coworkers. They even asked me about our marriage and if he had taken a lover. I responded to all the questions, but the answers didn't change much. James had led a very bland life. He was quiet and level-headed. He didn't yell or scream, even when we had our worst arguments. I told the police he had depression, but he had been in therapy and finally found a combination of medications that worked for him. We had always been extremely open and honest about mental health. He hadn't said anything to me about struggling with anything in months. Sure, he was down about losing his job, but that's just a temporary thing. The police jotted down notes, and by the time the sun was setting, they let me go home. That night led to even more restless sleep than the previous night. I tossed and turned, feeling the heavy weight of emptiness inside of the bed. Instinctively, I'd reach out to him, to touch him, and the cold sheets where his warm body once laid was more like a shock to my system. That night, my nightmares returned. For this time, I found myself in the mouth of a cave I'd often visited as a child. It was cold and damp, and there was a tinge of iron in the usually musky air. In my hand, I held a pair of scissors. I could hear muffled noises coming from deeper in the cave. I crept inside, and in the dim light emanating from the mouth of the cave, I could see my husband tied to a chair. There was blood matted to his hair, and he looked to be unconscious. There was a second chair next to him. In it sat a young woman, probably around 20. She had long, blonde hair that had twigs and leaves scattered through its knots. There was tape over her mouth, and the mascara stained her cheeks as her tears flowed freely. Like my husband, she was bound to the chairs, her ankles tied to their legs and her arms behind her back and strapped to the backing of the chair. As I walked towards them, I reached out to touch my husband's cheek when the woman's muffled screams filled the air. I once again woke up with a start. My knees were covered in musky dirt, and in my hand were strands of long, blonde hair. I was confused and exhausted. I didn't have any time to focus on my confusion. Even though it was earlier than I typically wake up, I figured there wasn't any point going back to bed. The police had scheduled a press conference that day, and asked me to speak at it. Where we didn't have any leads on where my husband could be, they hoped my pleads would either convince my husband to come home or encourage anyone who knew anything about to come forward. I spent my morning on the phone with my family. They were trying so hard to give me comfort from half a continent away, but nothing they said could ease the pain and confusion I felt. I flipped between anger and despair and loneliness and confusion as the day wore on. When it came time to get ready for the press conference, I just sat, staring at my closet. There, peeking out behind all the clothes, was a bag that contained my wedding dress. That bulky white bag was like a backdrop for the memories that ran through my head. All of our dates, our arguments, our plans and dreams just kept swirling in my head. In between the painful and bittersweet memories, the image of my husband and that woman in the cave sprang to my mind. I could see flashes of the scissors jutting towards the woman. I shook my head, assuming it was just stress and my brain trying to cope with my husband's absence. I quickly got dressed and made my way to the police station for the press conference. By the time I arrived there were already crowds of people surrounding the police station, and then I was rushed inside by two large and intimidating police officers. When I stepped inside the police station, it was buzzing with activity. There were officers answering phone calls, taking notes, and talking amongst themselves in front of a large chalkboard on wheels. On it was a photo of my husband and a photo of a woman from my dreams. One of the officers must have noticed the change in my expression as I stared at the board. He quickly explained to me that one of my husband's former co-workers was reported missing that morning. They had found her car in a similar way, and doors open, and keys in the ignition, and saw spots of blood in the driver's seat. It was abandoned on the side of the road leading north out of town. As of that moment, the only connection she had to my husband was their once shared workplace. The police told me they weren't sure how the two of them going missing was connected, but they told me they had seen cases like this before. Two young people having an illicit affair and then running away to be together. Tears streamed down my face as flashes of my husband smiling at his phone and staying late at work came bubbling up in my memory. I shook my head. We were still newlyweds. He loved me. There was no way it was an affair. I asked the police if they thought there was any way it was their workplace that was being targeted, and they assured me they were exploring all the possibilities. The news conference came and went in a flash. I don't remember making my desperate pleads. I don't remember what all I said. All I remember is the insurmountable urge to bring my husband home. The reporters were already aware of the missing woman and that she was my husband's coworker. They bombarded me with questions about them, if I knew her, had I seen them together, and if the police were sure they had not faked their deaths to be together. I think the press officer saw the hurt in my eyes at the reporter's veiled accusations because he quickly stepped in and took over answering the questions. I quickly left the makeshift stage and found myself weeping in the back room at the station. By the time I made it home, I was absolutely exhausted. I crawled into bed and quietly cried myself to sleep. My dreams were different. I was at home in bed when I heard my husband come in the front door. He silently crept in the bedroom and started undressing. I could see grease and oil stains in his clothes from his friend's car. he must not have noticed that I was awake. His phone buzzed as he was changing, and after checking it, his face went red with anger. He tossed the phone next to me and stormed off to the bathroom. I looked at the phone before the screen locked. It was a message from his coworker. It talked about how she was planning on telling me the truth. I woke up from the dream crying. Over the days, I had been doing research on missing persons and the support for their families. One posting I saw online stressed. You'll go through a ton of different thoughts, and sometimes your mind gets so stressed you start thinking of and dreaming what you feel would be the worst case scenario. I guess my mind thought the worst thing that could have happened to me was him leaving me for another woman. I spent all day hanging up flyers and going to his normal hangout. No matter what my mind wanted me to think, I wasn't willing to give up on James. I felt like everywhere I turned, I would see him out of the corner of my eye. When I got home that night, there was a police officer waiting for me. They asked me if they could collect his laptop to look for more evidence. And without a thought, I let him in to collect it. As he was leaving, he noticed some blood drops on the carpet and asked me about them. I told him I must have cut myself at some point because I really don't know or even remember how they got there. He gave me a hard and cold stare before leaving with my husband's laptop. At this point, I was starting to get worried. There was that night I woke up covered in blood and then in the mud, and now there is mystery blood drops on my floor. I resolved to use my phone to record my bedroom at night. I'm not sure what I expected to film, but I left the light on in the hallway, hoping I could figure out what was happening. What I caught on the video is nothing I anticipated. That night, I decided to sleep in one of James' shirts. Smell of his deodorant and cologne brought me a small bit of comfort as I drifted off to sleep. Then the dreams started. I was back in the cage, in the cave. My husband and that woman were still there. James was pale and sweating as if he had a deep fever. He had cuts on his body that were almost pulsating with pus. The woman's long hair had been cut off in jagged swipes. She apparently struggled against her bonds because her chair was tipped over and her face resting in a puddle of stagnant cave water while a large rat chewed at an open wound on one of her arms. Her eyes, they were closed, but they snapped open when she heard my footsteps coming towards them. As I stood over her, her body shuddered with deep guttural cries. I woke up in my bed the moment my boot made contact with her head. I was so shaken, I almost forgot about the camera. I stood up to make myself some coffee, and I went to walk down the hallway to the kitchen. I tripped over my boot. The bottom of it was covered in mud, blood, and strands of blonde hair. I suddenly remembered my phone and ran to check it. Watching the video, I was absolutely horrified. You can clearly see me standing up out of bed, walking to my husband's side of the bed, and then stood there for several minutes just seemingly staring at it. I then went to my closet and then dressed myself and walked out of the room. And I could hear the faint hum of my engine starting. Hours later, I returned, and the sound of my boots being tossed on the hall floor was audible. When I entered the bedroom, I removed my clothes and put them in the laundry basket. I curled up back in bed and awoke about 15 minutes later. What's truly terrifying, I don't remember any of this. I mean, I was having some weird dreams, but they're just dreams, right? I did some research on sleepwalking, and apparently extreme amounts of stress can cause you to suddenly start sleepwalking when you have no history of doing it. It's not uncommon to go through some sort of extreme trauma and then begin doing things in your sleep that you normally wouldn't. Could the sleepwalking and weird dreams be a byproduct of my pain? Could it be the overwhelming feelings of loss and guilt over my missing husband? I decided I wasn't going to play in the guessing games. At some point in the shuffle of reports and questioning, one of the officers on my husband's case had given me a business card for a local psychologist. I dug through my purse until I found the card and dialed the number on it as quickly as I could. A husky man answered. He seemed friendly enough, and when I explained who I was, he told me that he had been expecting a call from me. Apparently, he had a cancellation and was able to squeeze me in for an appointment that afternoon. The office was small and peaceful, and the psychologist was very kind. Since this was our first meeting, he spent more time going over what to expect from seeing him and getting to know me than he did addressing the elephant in the room. He thought he knew why I was there. My husband was missing, and I was caught in a place between mourning a loss and hope for my husband's return. He was a little taken back when I interrupted him to ask about sleepwalking. He coughed slightly and then asked me to elaborate. Not wanting to mention the blood and dirt, I just told him that without my husband, I was alone at night, and I was noticing little things move around the house while I slept. The psychologist eyed me up and down and then calmly confirmed some of what I read online. He studied me closely and suggested I purchase one of those little cameras you can strap to your body. He thought it might bring me some peace of mind to see it was actually me moving the stuff in the house, and that it would subconsciously reassure me that no one else was in the house with me. We casually chatted the rest of the time he had allotted for my appointment, and as soon as I pulled out of the parking lot, I went straight to our local electronics store. I managed to find those little action camera that I could afford, along with a chest harness. That night, I made sure that all my clothes and shoes were clean and put away. I put my car keys in the drawer and strapped on my new little observer. It took a while to find a position to sleep where the camera straps weren't digging into my shoulders and where I didn't think I would roll over and crush the camera. I stared at the ceiling, waiting, thinking about the last few days as I waited for the sleep to take me. My husband was gone. I was having terrifying nightmares, and I was most likely sleepwalking. I didn't know if it was all connected, but I was going to find out in the morning. Before I knew it, I'd slipped into another horrifying nightmare. I was back at the cave, and I had a baseball bat with me. The woman was still laying on her side, strapped to the chair with her face in the puddle. Her body shuddered with deep, labored breaths, and the back of her head looked caved in. James sat upright in his chair, his skin even more discolored than before. His body was covered in splotchy green and purple marks, while his face was a vibrant, angry shade of red. He was shaking violently, and I couldn't be sure if it was because he was cold or because the infection in his wounds had finally set in. As I stepped closer, his head weakly lifted and his eyes fluttered open to meet mine. I had never seen a more terrified look on his face. His mouth opened, and it looked as though he was trying to talk, but I couldn't hear a sound. As though I was in a trance, I turned away from him and towards the woman. I brought the bat above my head, and with all the force I can muster, I slammed it down on the side of her head. The sound of bone-shattering contact quickly gave way to morbid squelches as the floor and the walls of the cave became painted in her brain matter. Once her skull had mostly emptied of its contents, I turned to James. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he mouthed the words, "I love you," but before he could finish, the bat made contact with his right temple. The force of the blow flung him backwards, and I walked over to him in the chair he was tied to. His face quickly being coated with blood, and my heart ached. I swung the bat down in his face over and over until the look of pure terror had been demolished. As I pulled the bat up from the final crushing blow, it caught something. Feeling it snag, I looked down and saw the camera mounted on my chest. In that moment of recognition, I fell to the floor gasping. There was like a violent jolt ripping me out of a nightmare, just to have reality cut me down. Their blood mixing on the floor coated my hands and knees as I violently retched. I looked around me and realized they were never dreams. I did all this. Dreams, the memories that came back to me in a flood, the text, me confronting him, the argument, him insisting we take a drive to clear our heads, me hitting him with a wrench that he kept in the glove box, taking the chairs out of the bed of the truck and leaving him in the cave. Her sitting outside my house, sobbing over her lost lover, me coaxing her out and hitting her with the crystal decanter James's father gave us as a wedding gift, loading her into the trunk of her own car and tying her up next to James. I remember him trying to tell her he loved her. I remember driving their cars and walking home. I remember everything. I've been sitting on the floor of the cave, trying to process what all has happened this week or so, and to understand how I could do this and not remember. How could I sleepwalk and manage to kill 2 people? I held James' hand as his chest shuddered with its last breath, and I can only hope it brought him some small comfort. Once I finish typing this, I'm going straight to the police and turning myself in. I don't want to think about it, but the camera I've been wearing should hold more than enough information for them to figure out what happened. I wish there were some deep moral values I could impart on you as you read this, but there isn't. This is purely for me to try and reconcile what has happened, and so that no matter what happens to me, James and that woman's family will know the truth. I didn't intend for this to happen. I hope to God I never sleepwalk again. That was the end of that story. So I believe, let's look for the next story. See if there's anyone new shows up. Okay, well, don't see anything new. Hope you all enjoyed that story. Definitely was well written, I believe. The author is, in my opinion, one of the best that I've come across. She will make such a wonderful addition. So, the next story I think we'll read is... We'll go, I'm in the Navy. sailors are going missing on base, and my command is covering it up. If the title didn't explain it well enough, well, I'm going to give it a try here. I'm currently a seaman at training command for the sake of security. I won't reveal which, but it's a fairly large and well-known command. I've been here a few months waiting for classes to start. FYI, never listen to your recruiters. They don't have a shitting idea when it comes to when you will graduate or go to fleet. They told me I'd be in and out of training so fast I wouldn't even have time to unpack. I got here on Halloween, and it's now close to New Year's. Anyway, that's not why I'm writing this. There's something here, and not some whack job military experiment. Something much older than that. Something terrifying. When you're in between classes and training, you live your life assigned to a duty section and a permanent watch, meaning you have assigned days anytime you work, either cleaning or walking around the duty section and permanent watch. Excuse me. Fix that. I misread that. I apologize. I do apologize to the author as well. That was a mistake. I stumbled. So we'll go back to that. Fix that there. When you are in between classes and training, you live your life assigned to a duty section and a permanent watch, meaning you've assigned days any times you work either cleaning or walking around the base, making sure no Marines got their heads stuck in a toilet, and airmen working air conditioning. My permanent watch is mids rover, meaning I get to walk my happy ass around the base in the middle of the night, well, with a partner, or I get to walk around the barracks making sure that the fire extinguisher gets checked every hour that hasn't expired or discharged suddenly. Well, it's called fire watch. I first saw it when I was on a particularly dull fire watch. I had just checked the second floor's extinguisher and emergency exit for the 5th time that night when I heard the scratching. I looked up from my clipboard thinking someone got shitty down at the base club and forgot we had a front door. What I saw was not the drunken sailor I expected, but what looked like a hand. In the light from the escape, I could see it was long and thin, almost a mossy green color with short, broken yellow nails. I'm watching. Sure, that's our that's our barracks is currently filling with carbon monoxide or some other gas that would make me hallucinate when the door violently starts rattling. So, like the stupid junior sailor I run towards the fucking door because my unarmed clipboard carrying ass is going to be able to do something. Right. A few steps from the door I stopped, blood running colder than Neptune's tits on a blue rose ceremony. This thing, whatever the fuck this thing is tall. No, not like, haha, I'm sure everything seems so tall, but tall. Tall enough, it had to bend down to look into the small window of the fire escape door. It's green and wildly thin, and not just that, but its eyes glowed like 2 flashlights. When it saw me, it screamed the most ear-shattering scream I've ever heard. Its teeth were jagged and yellow and in 2 flaring slits for its nose. As I dropped my clipboard and fell to the floor, I could hear footsteps, and that's the last thing I remember. When I came to, I was in the senior chief's office with him and, well, our lieutenant staring at me. Outside the office, it sounded like the whole night crew was shuffling around, trying to pretend they were busy. After a series of rapid-fire questions and explaining what I saw, Lieutenant started swearing like, well, like a sailor, and left the room quickly to make some phone calls. Senior Chief calmly explained that the Rovers had been recalled to the barracks, which never happens, like ever. It's a major security issue, even if checking fire extinguisher and breaking up fights between Marines and raccoons is boring. He also very sternly told me I had seen nothing. There was no gas leak, and I was to report to medical in the morning because clearly I was very sick, running a fever and hallucinating. I was swiftly dismissed from his office and told to go to bed, but as I was leaving, I caught him watching the security footage on his computer. You could see 2 lights coming from the door's window, and then me dropping to the ground. Walking out of his office, I was suddenly bombarded by the night crew asking what happened and why they were recalled, and, well, I told them honestly, I've got no fucking clue. Next morning, after waiting several hours at sick call, I was given a clean bill of health. There was absolutely nothing wrong with me. No signs of illness, disease, or defect, which, well, it doesn't mean anything much coming from Navy Medical, but at that point, I would take anything I could get. After returning to the senior's office with my handy-dandy paperwork, I was once again sat down and told nothing happened. I was also being put on external night rover team, meaning I would have a partner and be checking the outdoor areas of the base. Fucking fantastic, right? See some sort of tall-ass green demon fucker, and I get to be stuck outside all night with it. A radio, a flashlight, and maybe a competent partner who wanted to do more than hang out the female's barracks smoke pit. That was about a week ago. I was just starting to forget about that demonic green bean and starting to feel comfortable at my new watch. When shit changed. I woke up this afternoon with my roommate in a full panic. One of the new seaman recruits fresh out of boot had gone missing at some point between when I got off watch at 6 a.m. and when my roommate got out of their class at 2 p.m. Poor kid probably didn't even get to wash the smell of fear and Lever 2000 out of his clothes before he went missing. The base was preparing searches of the beaches and doubling down on security and rovers. When I assumed my watch, we were given strict instructions to stay in pairs and radio anything we found. If we found anything related to the missing sailor, we were not to touch anything and call it in immediately while keeping everyone else away from what we had found. How we would know what was related to the missing sailor? I had no fucking idea, but it's the military, where logic doesn't matter and instructions aren't given to make sense. Our watch started off fairly normal with double the personnel. It was much easier to cover ground and not feel so alone. Sounds lame, but one of the largest bases in the country is creepy as fuck, naturally, but when there's only 2 people walking around outside. My partner and I took the path to the beach training area, while the other team started with parking lots and classrooms. As we were walking to the beach, I hear this absolutely miserable, ear-raking screech. My partner did too, because he covered his ears as fast as I did. Our radio started screaming static, and we looked at each other, deciding what our next step should be. We could go forward and investigate and find something we didn't want to, or potentially break up some super secret spy plot. My partner is absolutely convinced someone was jamming our radios, and we'd be heroes if we could corner them. Not that anyone with that equipment would be unarmed or would think twice about picking off 2 junior sailors. Well, we could turn around at least until our radios were working, and we could call up for backup. But my partner was convinced that these expert spies he dreamed up would get away. Okay, well, you could split up. One of us goes forward to investigate and one back to get help. The exact thing we were told not to do. So, what do? We go the fuck forward because my partner is an idiot. And I ain't about to get no captain's mask because his dumbass won't go back. The screeching gets louder and louder, and we have to shut our radios off because the static is just so overwhelming. My partner is just so caught up in the idea he's going to get a letter of recommendation, he didn't notice the droplets of blood in the sand. He also didn't notice the missing sailor's name tag being licked by the low tide. We were nearing the piers when I saw the lights. I guess I should probably just call them eyes at this point. My heart sank. I fucking knew what I saw was real, and my partner was about to see it too. Or if he would have if the thing hadn't launched out from under the pier at him. It was like watching one of those trapdoor spiders attack. My partner had no clue what happened. I can only hope his death was swift. I watched this thing fly at him at an inhuman speed. I heard his bones shatter on impact, and I heard it howl in delight as it ripped the skin from his face. I ran, running blindly as fast as I could go. I didn't even feel the pavement between my boots or stop running until I ran face first into the other rovers. Sobbing, I grabbed the radio and told the senior it was bad. It was back, and he needed to get down there. Immediately, we were all recalled, and once again, I was in the office. This time surrounded by officers I had never met. They assured me they had a rescue team down in the area, and once again, I was hallucinating and managed to abandon my roving partner. That didn't last long, though. One of the officers, a rear admiral, I think, got a phone call. He quickly turned as pale as I felt and told the senior to mark the 2 missing sailors as AWOL. He wanted me detained and everyone to regroup at the main quarterdeck. I've been locked in this office for 2 hours. I don't know what's going to happen to me, and I don't know what happened to the other 2 sailors, but I do know a couple of things. One being, your recruiter fucking lied. Given how all the senior enlisted and officers had acted about this, they fucking knew something was going on and covered it up. I think anyone who has been in long enough knows the dangers aren't sunken ships or unsung battles, but the things that lurk by the water. Second, I know I'm not getting out of this mess I didn't ask to be in, and so I'm writing this down here. I was lucky I kept my phone hidden in my cargo pocket. I don't know if the other branches have this problem, but I know if you hear about a sailor going AWOL, it probably isn't what it seems. I hear them coming back now. I hope I get the opportunity to update this later, but if I don't, just know there's things out there we don't understand, that they're older than us, and the government and the military fucking knows about them. That was the end of that story. Let's see. Looking through to see what would be a nice, good story to go with for. I hope you did enjoy that story, though. I mean, even if it was insulting to Marines, it was still well written. All right, I think the next story we'll do is, well, let's see. I think we'll check this one out. Let's see here. Emma. Title is Emma. She's always been there, in the forest, for as long as anyone could remember. My grandparents used to tell us stories about her. She was once young and beautiful, the pride of the town, but beyond her beauty, she had a wit that could cut down the toughest men. She could sing. Emma was her name, and Emma had her choice of suitors, but none ever captured her heart. Well, not like that mysterious out-of-towner. Rumor had he had come from some far-off land. He was traveling, looking for inspiration for his stories. He'd come down to the tavern to listen to local legends, not knowing he'd soon become one. It was one dreary October when he was sitting in the bar, documenting drunken tales when he saw Emma. She was singing on the stage a mournful song of lost love. The attraction was magnetic, and soon they were inseparable. As months drew on, they grew closer, and the stranger's time in town was drawing to a close. They both knew time was short and would spend every waking moment together. One night, when the fog was dense and the forest around the town was still, they decided to go for a stroll. Hand in hand, they walked out of the town, and neither would ever return. Everyone thought they had run away together until a local hunter found a clump of Emma's beautiful raven hair, bloody and matted to a rock. Back then, they weren't sure what happened, and, well, we aren't any closer to knowing the truth today, but that hasn't stopped the town from guessing. Some people think the young lovers quarreled about him leaving, and in the argument, he pushed Emma. While other people think he told her he was leaving and she couldn't bear the thought of being without him. Whatever may have happened, neither of their bodies had ever been found, and most people assume the man left the town that night. The legend grew and spread through the town, especially after people spoke of seeing a woman in the forest and hearing a soft song coming through the dense thicket of trees. Personally, I don't think Emma ever left. On cold, foggy nights, I can hear a whisper on the wind coming from the forest. It almost sounds like a soft ballad of lost love. And even stranger yet, not one woman has gone missing in our forest. There are plenty who should have. I wish it weren't so, but it's not uncommon for a woman coming into town, bedraggled and in a panic, telling a story of a date gone wrong, or a man finding her on a walk and trying to attack her, only to be saved by a woman who is thin and wispy, with raven black hair and tear-stained cheeks, a woman whose feet don't touch the ground and doesn't seem quite right. We always believe them because the men who tried to hurt them never came back, and we never find any trace of the men. I know Emma is still here because she saved me. When I was young, I used to run into the forest to escape home. My parents were self-destructive at best. Dad was a raging alcoholic battling demons left from the war he didn't want to fight. and my mother was a shell of a woman. 15 years of broken bottles and promises will do that to a person, and, well, makeup can't hide the bruises left on someone's soul. They had me late in their marriage. I think Mom hoped my birth would be the miracle that saved the marriage, but it didn't. Dad was so far gone, I don't think anything could have saved him, and I quickly learned as a child to keep my head low and stay quiet. The forest seemed the one place no one would go to find me. I always had to come back home, but for a few hours, I was safe. I would listen to the song on the wind and pretend I was a brave knight who would swoop in and rescue my mother, imagining my dad as an evil dragon, and I would do and imagine anything that fulfilled my childhood wishes and dreams. I even had a favorite rock by a small pond where I would sit and do homework or draw. No matter how drunk or angry Dad was, he never bothered coming to find me, and looking back, I almost wonder if he knew it would end if he tried. I haven't been home from school long when I heard his truck in the driveway. He was home from work earlier than usual, and the air grew tense as the truck's engine died. Mom gave me some crayons and a notebook and hurried me outside. She'd been through this enough times to know nothing good would come from such an early arrival. I had barely made it out the door when the screaming started. Dad has lost another job. He'd shown up late and hung over one too many times. The screen door slammed behind me as I could hear the first bottle hit the wall. As his words flew through the air, I ran. This was bad, and I knew it. There was something different about today. I don't know if it was his tone or the words he used, but something was very wrong. So I ran. I ran to the forest, to my pond, and before long I was scrambling up my favorite rock where nothing could touch me, where my home and my father didn't matter, where my mom wasn't hurting, and where I was safe. It's so strange. Other people would talk about the song on the wind, but at the pond it was almost like hearing it whispered in your ear. I could never make out the words, but its ethereal sound was somber, yet calming. I would watch the stillness of the pond, remembering stories of Emma, and pictured her life playing out like a movie on the glassy water. I always saw a beautiful young woman walking off into the sunset with a mysterious rider. I now know that isn't true. But I think as young children, we all have innocent hopes deep inside us. With a snap of a twig, my peace was broken. The sanctuary I created was violated. All I had to hear was the footfall to know Dad had found me. Without turning around, I could smell the alcohol emanating from him, and I could feel his unbridled rage penetrating the air around us. The water next to me rippled with violent anticipation as I felt Dad's hand wrap around my ponytail, yanking me to the ground. Instinctively, I curled into a ball with my back to him and my knees tucked tightly into my chest. After the second blow from his steel-toed boot, I gasped, opening my eyes for the first time since he had wrenched me from behind from the false safety of my rock. Looking back at me, wedged in a deep crevasse in my rock was a skull, hollowed-eyed with dark black hair shrouding around it. I screamed, and my father's rage intensified. I heard the rustle of his pants, and his leg swung back for another kick, but the blow never came. instead of a loud shriek, echoed through the forest. Looking back over my shoulder, I saw the woman. Her feet didn't touch the ground. Her tattered clothing and long hair swirled around her face. Patches of her tissue, thin and brittle skin missing from her face. Her jaw hung slackly and her teeth exposed through shreds of lip that still had traces of lipstick on them. Her eyes were cavernous sockets with a deep red glow burning within them. Her gaunt, skeletal arms reached out towards my dad, with her claw-like fingers digging into his shoulders. He bellowed in pain as blood ran down his booze-stained shirt. With no effort, the woman flung him across the pond, and he hit a large tree with a resounding thud. As I hinched myself backward toward the rock, she came closer to me. She was moving slowly, mirroring my speed. I was trapped. Nowhere to go, and I was panicking. I sobbed harder than I had when I received the brutal beating from my father had laid out for me. She reached out towards me, and I closed my eyes, anticipating the same fate my father had received. Something gentle touched my cheek, and when I opened my eyes, there was a beautiful woman before me. Long black hair and a beautiful gown. Her eyes burned with an indescribable intensity as she wiped my tears. Her skin soft and warm as was her smile. The being in front of me seemed wholly human. In the distance, I could hear my father move, and the woman turned towards him, and with a flash, she was the heinous monster I had seen just moments before. My father was struggling to stand, and as he struggled, the woman turned back to me. She was once again her soft and human-looking self. She touched her head to mine as she whispered to me, telling me to run. I stifled my tears and nodded my head. With a flash, the woman was soaring away from me, the tatters of her flesh and clothing rippling in the wind as she barreled towards my father. I ran, faster than I ever imagined possible. Each one of the father's screams seemingly increased the speed at which I took every step. Before long, I had reached home, and as I ran through the back door, I found my mother crumpled on the floor. Speeding had been more severe than those in the past. Her clothing soaked with blood, her face so swollen it was almost unrecognizable. When she saw me, she started sobbing and crawled towards me. We held each other and cried together. We called the police and filed a missing persons report, but we knew Dad wasn't coming back. They whisked Mom away in an ambulance, and the wail of the sirens seemed like they were ringing in a new era in our lives. Emma saved us that day. Weeks later, I returned to my spot, and it was quiet and still as ever. I stared into the pond, wondering about what had happened, when I saw the reflection of the kind and gentle woman who had saved me. Turning to look behind me, she wasn't there, but there was a locket on the ground next to the crevasse. I picked it up and slowly turning it to reveal Emma's initials. There was pictures of who I assumed would be Emma and the stranger. His face had been clawed out, and all that remained of the image was the body of a seemingly tall man in a dark coat. When I returned home, I told my mom about the skull and showed her the locket, and she once again called the police. After making up a story about how I found the skull and locket, they followed me to the pond. They quickly taped off the area, treating it like a crime scene, even though I was sure this skull was far older than they anticipated. It didn't take them long to come to the same conclusion I had. They were able to cover most of her body, and are investigating the man pictured in her locket just to see if they can find any answers about the mysterious rider. The case is well over 100 years old, but we're all hoping for closure for her. According to the evidence they could find, she had a large amount of head trauma. The bone in the back in her neck was broken, indicating strangulation. She also had several broken bones that had never been set properly. The police suspect the mysterious man wasn't as kind as everyone had thought. It's now believed Emma rejected his advances or refused to leave town with him, and he in turn killed her. She had a beautiful service and burial, attended by most all the townsfolk and all the women she had protected over the years. At night, we can still hear her song on the wind, so I know she's still with us, and even with the answers about what happened to her, she may never leave. In death, she's able to save us like no one could save her, and part of me thinks she wouldn't have it any other way. We've come to accept that when a man from a town goes missing, it's probably for the best. It hurts sometimes, especially when it's your cousin or the star quarterback, but we know Emma has her reasons. As long as her call sings from the forests, we know we are safe. And that was the end of that story as well. Let's find another one. Okay, trying to find a good story here. There's so many to select from. I think we'll read this one. I will never LARP again. Recently, I joined an internet community for LARPers. If you don't know what LARPing is, it's a live action roleplay. You know those nerds who randomly show up in public places with costumes and foam swords? That's me. At least it was. I loved LARPing, not just historical LARPing, but any type I could get involved with. Dressing up and fighting or pretending to go on adventure was an amazing and refreshing escape from my rather toxic home and school life. I was strange enough without LARPing, and being the chubby kid who liked dragons and magic didn't really help my social life. But no matter, our LARPing group always accepted outcasts like me. Unfortunately, my local LARPing group consisted mostly of people fresh out of high school or people in their early 20s, and as people do when they reach young adulthood, they soon left for college and other adventures, leaving our small town behind and me without a LARPing group. So I did whatever any lonely nerd would do. I went online. On a slightly infamous forum website, I found a subforum dedicated to my art. It was a beautiful community of role players. They shared costume and weapon builds, events, even storylines. I learned so many things from the community at large, and it wasn't long before I found out there was a new group forming one town over from me. It was a little different from the group I was used to. My group typically stuck with your stereotypical fairies and mages and wizards and bars, but this new group, they focused on horror storylines. While it wasn't my speed, since it was the only group local to me, I figured I'd give it a shot. They had shared pictures of some amazing FX makeup, and the wounds they did with the makeup looked more real than any injury I had ever experienced. Their weapon making was beyond astonishing, too. In one of their pictures they shared was a golden dagger with a jewel-encrusted handle and what looked to be ancient script on the guards. I couldn't believe it was a prop when I first saw it. They had listed an email on one of their forum posts trying to find new members, and before long I was emailing back and forth with the group's representative. The rep said they had weekly meetings, but I knew my mom wouldn't let me borrow the car that often. She sent me a reassuring email saying it was fine and I couldn't make all the meetings, just so long I make it to their big event the following month. She told me they would send me some props and help me make some too. So without hesitation, I quickly sent her my address and eagerly awaited my package, hoping Mom wouldn't get it while I was at school. I knew she would be livid that I gave out my address to strangers online, plus she was beyond ashamed of what she called my childish hobby. She says someone my age shouldn't have such strange and vivid imagination, that I should be more mature. I am a junior in high school, after all. Luckily, the group's rep sent it with tracking, so the day the package was supposed to arrive, I magically came down with a stomach bug and had to stay home from school. I ordered enough stuff online to know that there was a large chance the package could arrive before Mom left for work. With me staying home from school, there was even a risk she'd want to stay home to check on me. I somehow managed to convince her I was just going to sleep all day and that her being a helicopter mom would only slow my recovery. I watched out the window as she backed out of the driveway, and I really got lucky because right after my mom left for work, there was a knock at the door. The package for my new LARPing family was here. I held my breath as I ran to the door. I felt like I was holding the key to my brand new life as I picked the package up off the doorstep. I cradled the package like a new father would his firstborn as I went upstairs to my room. I set the package down on my computer desk. Thoughts of stage makeup and costuming supplies filled my head as I ripped the tape from the box. I was more than slightly disappointed when I moved the flaps of the box, revealing some gold-toned jewelry and what looked to be little shriveled up wads of liquid latex with little hairs sticking out of them. I couldn't figure out why they'd sent so many used pieces of latex, but I assumed there was a purpose for sending them to me. The jewelry was heavy in my head, and I had a feeling this wasn't just costume jewelry. There were two pieces, both necklaces. One featured a heavy chain and a large pendant with a grotesque-looking eye emblazoned on it, and its iris featured a sparkling blood-red stone. The second necklace had a similar chain, but it had a pendant on it that was shaped like a large tube. It had some of the same ancient script I had seen in the pictures online engraved on it. As I ran my hands over the tube, my fingers must have grazed a hidden button because a sharp blade jolted out of the bottom of it, while what seemed to be a guard of some sort expanded out of the sides. Of all the things I expected from a LARPing group, a hidden spring-loaded dagger was not one of them. Before I could even finish looking at the dagger, my phone buzzed. The local group rep had sent me a message asking if I had liked my new package. Shocked and wondering how she knew it was already here, another message appeared. She swiftly explained that the next storyline we would be acting out had to do with a cult. They had provided me a ritual dagger and ingredients to use while in character. She told me I didn't have to prep much, just make sure I was wearing white when the day came, and they would guide me through everything once I had arrived. All this was starting to feel really strange. But then again, I had never heard of a horror LARPing group. They seemed friendly enough, and in my desperation for friends, I really didn't want to question things too much. I hid the box under my bed and eagerly started counting down the days until I met my new friends. In the coming weeks, we exchanged more messages, and I grew more and more comfortable with the group. They excitedly told me this would be their biggest meeting yet, with members coming from all over the U.S. to participate. I devoted my time to learning about the cults and everything horror I could. I learned about everything from the Jonestown Massacre to the history of horror as a writing genre, and even the development of monster FX makeups. As I learned more, I started to notice strange things happening around me. I slowly started to hear faint whispers at night as I laid down, coupled with small noises coming from beneath my bed. When I would go to sleep, I would have absolutely horrifying dreams. In my dreams, I could see a dark room with a large slab in the corner of it, adorned with writing that matched what was on my dagger. Pinned to the walls were decaying bodies of young men and women dressed in all-white outfits. It looked as though their eyelids had been removed and their eyes replaced with large red jewels that reflected a deep, almost unending darkness. Protruding from their chests were daggers almost identical to mine. As I would watch horrifying, a smoke would fill the room. As it swirled and danced, the bodies' necks would pop and snap as their heads followed the smoke to the slab in the center of the room. I could hear jaws clicking and popping as they started whispering chants I couldn't begin to understand. In my dreams, I would walk to the large slab, and as I did, my feet would brush these tiny, shriveled-up pieces of flesh. As I neared the slab, I could see that the wall behind it was adorned with thousands of amulets that seemed as though the jeweled-eyed visages were staring deep into my soul. Just when it seemed like the sparkling eyes would blink, the smoke in the room would start to churn and thicken, forming a grotesque woman's face. It was always right at that moment, I would feel a deep, piercing pain in my chest and wake up drenched in sweat and screaming. My mom got more and more concerned as the days went on, and even started questioning what I was doing to suddenly bring on such terrible night terrors. Afraid she would ban me from taking the car and seeing my new friends, I would just tell her I was stressed because of school. I was only days away from finals, and I was hoping she would buy it. I was lucky that the meeting with my new LARPing group fell during the 2-week break between semesters. When the night terrors continued after my finals, I told her I was stressed about scholarship prospects and my future college plans. As much as she didn't believe that was causing my night terrors, she was too thrilled with the idea I was going to college. I never mentioned it before, and to be frank, my grades weren't exactly great. Part of me was honestly hoping that these terrible dreams were just from stress. Maybe it was school, or the fact I had been without friends for so long, but little did I know it wasn't stress getting to me at all. Before I knew it, the day to meet my new friends had arrived. I told my mom I had signed up for a study group in the next town over to try to help me with my grades, and that maybe It would help me be less stressed and help stop the night terrors. With that kind of logic, my mom didn't even question me. In fact, she actually praised me. She went on and on how proud she was that I had left my childish fantasies and played pretend behind, and how great I was finally focusing on my future. I almost felt a pang of guilt when I started the car, but when I looked at my backpack in the passenger seat, the shame of lying to my mom quickly faded. She would have never approved anything outside her cookie-cutter version of normality and her harsh expectations of what my life should be. I couldn't let her view of the world change who I am. I plugged the address of our meetup into my phone and I was off. Most LARPing sessions they're held in parks and other open spaces, so I wasn't totally surprised when the address was an empty parking lot. What was slightly surprising was the dense forest around the parking lot. I was hoping that we wouldn't be using the woods. It would be so easy for people to get lost and hurt, especially me, since this was my first time out there. Luckily enough, when I got out of my car, I noticed a sign with a bright red arrow and the same creepy eye from the pendant on it. I took my 2 necklaces and put them on, and then I shouldered my backpack and started walking. I could smell a fire further down the path I went, and almost like a campfire filled with sage and other herbs with a hint of burnt meat. I wonder if the smell had anything to do with the LARPing group when I heard a twig behind me snapped. When I opened my eyes next, I was laying down in a cold, damp room. I tried to move my hands to touch the throbbing knot in my head, but I quickly realized they were chained behind my back. As my eyes focused, I saw I was in the room from my nightmares. The smell of putrefying and rotting bodies permeated my nose. I could feel the cold slab underneath me. I felt like I was being watched as I heard footsteps coming down the distant corridor. The room quickly filled with people in dark hooded robes. Though I couldn't see their faces, I could see they had large amulets and hidden knives around their neck. Like mine, they were adorned with large jeweled eyes, but their amulets were a vibrant silver in contrast to my golden one. The silence in the room was deafening, and then the chanting started. It was barely above a whisper when a figure stepped closer to me. "Welcome to our group. We're so glad you reached out to us. We've been awaiting the arrival of our new members. As you can see, some of our old ones are, well, indisposed." Her velvety, soft voice rang in my ears with a menacing pang. "We are protectors and guardians. We are guides for the lost and the lonely. We bring them unity and give them a home. We give them her. She gives them purpose. She brings us light, and she provides. The ceremony is to welcome you into the fold, to give you purpose beyond yourself." She pulled out the box that was once in my backpack. She emptied the box's contents into her hands. It was then I realized they were eyelids. They weren't just pieces of FX makeup prosthetics. These were real eyelids that I had held in my hands at one point. She came towards me, and I started to struggle against my restraints, but I couldn't move. She stroked my cheek, and I could almost feel her smiling behind her hood. She quickly and expertly placed the eyelids in some intricate pattern on my stomach and chest. Out of the corner of my eyes, I saw smoke filling in the room. As the gray wisps danced in the air, the chanting grew louder. I could feel the amulet on my chest vibrating and heating up. The smoke was dancing above my head, and the chanting grew louder. I could see a face start to form in it. she is here. She welcomes your contributions to the collective. She appreciates your donations to the world. You see, while she is our goddess, our ruler, she's limited. She needs help, and we're here to aid her. Her powers have weakened over the millennia. She has lost her devotees, the priests and priestesses who used to worship her, elevate her. Our collective consists of her last remaining adherents. Her secrets have been passed down through generations of loyal disciples. We remain to help her, protect her. We bring her sustenance. When we provide, she provides. In exchange for sight, she protects our land, the trees, and the forest. She ensures good harvests and peace in the forests, the hooded figure explained without a pause. The smoky face was now drifting closer to mine, with more form than ever before. You could see what would be her skin looked fragile and pitted. It looked like the skin of someone who had lived hundreds of years. Her eyes were sunken, beaming red lights, boring down on me. Her lips were paper thin, doing little to hide the broken, jagged teeth concealed within her mouth. Her wispy hair danced like flames around her ancient and grotesque form. She needs your eyes. To see, that is. They say the eyes are the windows to the soul. They're much more than that. When used correctly, they are more like the doorway to the soul, to the pure energy that creates all of us. Our goddess has been crippled by time and only retains limited amount of sight. And without her sight, she cannot protect, and she cannot provide. Your offering tonight will provide her with the ability to see all her lands and charges. It will extend her powers just a while longer, and it will be better for the world. Why, I know you were expecting some silly role-play game. I think you'll experience this far more fulfilling. And besides, you'll join the rest of our friends here, forever, together, with those who have gone before you. I could feel the golden dagger start to move over my chest, its chain rubbing across my neck. The wispy figure had begun to form arms, and as she did, I could feel them tugging at the dagger. It felt as though she were searching for the release I had accidentally found weeks earlier. With an echoing click, I heard the dagger snap open. It was then that the chanting reached crescendo. The clicking of extended daggers rang throughout the room. The goddess traced the dagger lightly along my chest and brought it up to my face. As she neared my eyes, she let out a demonic, ear-piercing scream. It was at that moment I could see the silver daggers piercing the hands of her followers. As their blood dripped to the floor, the goddess whipped the dagger across my face, ripping the eyelid from my left eye. I screamed in horrified agony, blood filling my field of vision, and the pain was just excruciating. Started sobbing. The tears stung my open wound as I tried to thrash my head around. I started pleading as the goddess brought the dagger towards my other eye. Bear witness to the truth, her hollow, haunting voice said, barely above a whisper. Suddenly there was a loud bang and yelling. All of the followers of the collective had sounded like women, and even at the chanting loudest, it still sounded like a calm hum, but this new noise sounded more frantic and authoritative. Their footfalls sounded heavy. A familiar voice rang through the chamber right as I started to black out. I never knew that even without an eyelid, your sight can fade into darkness. I heard women screaming and men yelling, and I almost thought I could hear my mom. The last noise I heard was the goddess howling in agony, almost like an animal caught in a hunter's trap. This time when I awoke, it was in a hospital room. My mother was there, and so were two policemen. I could tell my mom had been crying, and the policemen, while stern, seemed very shaken as they stared at the bandage on my arm. They quietly explained what had happened. Apparently, my mom was more than just shocked when I mentioned going out of town for studying. She knew I was lying. I guess in some ways, I'm lucky she's kind of crazy and overbearing, because she assumed I was going to buy pot and decided to follow me. When she saw me get hit by the cultists, she ran out of the woods and called the police. Once the police arrived, they were able to use scent hounds to find my trail. My scent led right to a large boulder, and they could hear chanting coming from behind it. Excuse me. They called in backup and were able to push the boulder out of the way. The noises I heard were them running down the hallways. They didn't see the goddess, but they did see the room was full of smoke. The police were able to detain all the cultists, but none of them would give clear answers about what happened down that hellhole. The bodies on the walls were removed, and the police are currently working on identifying them. So far, the freshest bodies are local missing people, but some of the corpses look to be old, like at the very least 100 years old. So they're waiting on some anthropologists and various other scientists to help gather what information they can from the bodies. Right now, they think sacrifices have been going on in that cave for thousands of years. We aren't sure what's going to happen with my eye. Humans are supposed to have eyelids. They help prevent infection. They keep your eye clean and moist, and they help with sleep. The doctors stressed I'm going to need eye drops and will probably have a very long-standing relationship with my local hospital. My mom has also decided that I'm going to be homeschooled from here on out, partly because of my eye, but mostly because she's afraid that the cultists will come after me again. I convinced my mom to bring me my laptop so I could post this as a warning. I think the strangest part of all of this is that when my mom left to go get my laptop, I turned on the TV. On the news, they were talking about forests suddenly turning black, trees dying as a plague of bark beetles came out of nowhere attacking the trees. Even though my eye is covered, I can still see smoke in front of it. And there is a tree branch scratching at the window in my room. Each time the leaves make contact with the glass, it's like I can hear thousands of screams at once. Even worse, when I close my eye, I can see the goddess. She's shriveled and in pain, her skin flaking away and her smoke getting thinner. I just tried to rearrange my pillows so I could sit more comfortably, and underneath them I found an ancient, jeweled, encrusted dagger. And that was the end of that story. A LARPing cult. Interesting. Okay. Have a little bit of drink here, and then we'll get started on the next story. I think tonight I'll go a little bit longer than what I have the last few weeks. So, hope you do enjoy tonight's stream. I'm assuming that AJ left, Arthur. He probably went to bed. Or maybe he's listening, I don't know. Okay, so I believe the next story will be... Let's see. You know what, we'll go ahead and do the railroad one. This one is titled, I come from a long line of railroaders, and train derailments aren't always what we think they are. My family has been involved with railroads for more generations than I would care to think about. And recently, I was helping my dad go through our family's boxes of memorabilia and heirlooms, trying to decide what to donate to our local historical society. Between the brakeman's bars, timetables, faded tickets, and a logbook, I found a small journal. Looking inside the cover, it had a name, Emma Cave. As far as I knew, we weren't related to anyone with that name, so naturally I got curious. Apparently, Emma was an opera singer in the 1900s. She was a frequent rider of the various Southern Pacific trains that crisscrossed Southern California. She more often than not traveled with her theater company and often enjoyed the luxury cars, while her companions were, usually regulated to the more mundane quarters of the train. She wrote of her frequent travels and dishes served and how the various cars were decorated. She told the people she met on the train, a regular crewmen she had met. As I was flipping through the journal, I discovered several pages in the middle of the journal seemed to have a light speckling of blood on them. She skipped a few pages and then started making entries again. Her once beautiful handwriting had become shaky and distressed. What she wrote was so disturbing, I feel like I have to share it. Here's a transcription of what I found. March 30th, 1907. Dear Diary, the last few days have been the most trying I'd ever experienced. A few days ago, I found myself aboard the Sunset Express. We were traveling from New Orleans to San Francisco. The ride was mostly uneventful. I spent most of my time lounging in my private cabin and observing the great brakeman. Early in the afternoon on the 28th, we started to approach the small city of Colton. Having been in my cabin most of the day, I decided to stretch my legs and explore the train more. As I did, a certain feeling of unease seemed to settle in my chest. I was unsure if the anxiety crushing down on me was because of my upcoming performance or if it was something else. As I explored the cars, I kept seeing something running outside the windows of the train car. It was a thin, spindly black figure, darker than coal and quicker than the fastest train I'd ever been on. Whatever the creature was, it had no discernible features. It was almost like a humanoid-shaped void. I only caught glimpses of it out of the corners of my eyes, and I hoped so deeply it was just a trick of the lighting, hoping it wasn't any form of hysteria. As we approached the 4 o'clock hour, I started to see the figures more frequently. As we neared Colton, the figures not only appeared more often, they became more numerous and more grotesque. Some of them appeared to be mangled bodies that had been reanimated, while others had extra limbs and heads. No two were exactly alike, but yet they were all equally terrifying. I was thoroughly convinced. At this point, stress had taken over my mind and started to make my way back to my cabin. Each window I passed on the way revealed more and more of these strange and disturbing creatures. As I made it to my door, I could hear the engineer yelling. He and I had become friendly during my many travels on the line, and it wasn't hard for me to recognize his voice. He was screaming at the firemen, yelling at him, "Get those things out of here! Get them off!" I went to make my way towards the front of the train when I saw more of the creatures. Far from running alongside the train as they had been, they were now crawling in the windows. Some of them were even reaching long, ghastly arms inside the train through windows that various passengers had opened. Long, emaciated talon-like figures grabbed women by their hair, almost as if they were trying to pull them through the small gaps. Screams filled the train as passengers panicked. The crew was yelling frantically. It was absolute chaos as more and more of the creatures appeared. All around me, people were being attacked. With each touch from one of the creatures, a festering blister would appear on their skin, almost as if they had been branded by the devil himself. The cars were absolutely filled with these creatures as our train crested the hill leading into Colton. The closer we got to town, the more depraved the creatures got. Bodies were being flung around the car as they weighed no more than a feather. Somehow, in the pandemonium, I was pushed against the window. Down the line, I could see a few of these horrifying creatures gathering about what looked to be the switch, grasping at it desperately. As the switch moved, the creatures each threw their head back, almost like they were joining an unholy chorus. And creatures on the train joined in, and each time one of them joined, it was like the sounds of 1,000 tortured souls escaped them. The train's whistle started wailing as the train headed near the switch and fell to slow. The chaotic energy in the train was matched by the panic of the switchman on the ground. He must have heard the panicked whistles and was running towards the train. As he approached the switch, he saw the creatures. He didn't have but a second to react before they swarmed him. I could see the blistering welts appearing on his skin. The last time I saw him, he was swinging his brakeman's club toward the horde of creatures. We hit the part of the track controlled by the switch, and I remember feeling the cabin go airborne. I remember hitting the seats and the sounds of glass breaking. When the car came to a stop, I was lying on what had been the windows. I couldn't feel one of my legs. It was trapped beneath the seat. As I gained my bearings, I could see those creatures grabbing everyone they had touched, everyone who had been branded, and dragging them out of the train. This time when the creatures touched them, their bodies went limp. The life vanished from their eyes. I could hear the sounds of people from the town rushing to the accident, and even though they moved frantically, I knew there would not be many survivors. While I laid in pools of glass and blood, I could hear different people talking. There were whispers of the creatures, how they were back, that the train companies had not heeded the warnings. There was a man yelling, telling our would-be rescuers to stand back and just let the creatures do what they needed to. That was right when I blacked out. At some point, a rescuer found me. I'm currently in the church across from the tracks. There was just so many people injured and dead that the Colton Hospital had become overwhelmed, so the community quickly converted the church to an emergency hospital for those who weren't gravely injured. In the bed next to me is the engineer. He had been rambling incoherently since I awoke. He's the only one I've heard talk about the creature since I woke up. The doctors are whispering about committing him to a sanatorium. I've decided to write this and slip it into his coat pocket. I know he isn't crazy. He needs to know it too. It's clear to me that someone knew this could happen. They knew about the existence of these creatures and chose to hide them. I can only hope this tragedy is enough to make the train companies rethink using these tracks. I showed the journal entry to my dad, and his face went pale. He apparently had heard stories about those kinds of creatures. He said there had been reports all over the world of similar sightings around train accidents. He's not sure what they are, but he seems pretty convinced it's the universe's way of telling us that humans were never meant to travel by rail or any speed faster than we are naturally capable of. He thinks that once we reach a certain speed, we're able to see things we shouldn't, and those things can see us back. He says it's why so many people imagine seeing things running alongside their cars when they're traveling. Most people just don't realize those creatures aren't imaginary. He also told me about a family legend from one of our relatives who was an engineer during a massive train accident. Apparently, so many lives were lost and he felt so much guilt, he lost his mind. He ended up being committed and remained in the asylum until his death. He said it was one of my great-uncles, and he can remember traveling to the asylum with his father as a young boy to collect my great-uncle's belongings when he had passed. Well, this journal must have been part of what they received from the hospital. We still have storage full of different files and documents. I'll be sure to share anything else of note that I find. And that's the end of that one. I think we'll read one more. So let's see. Okay, locating a good one. Hopefully you have been enjoying the stories this evening, and if you have, be aware that the author, it's Casey, we're alien, and information to her Reddit page has been provided in the description. So please let her know how much you like her stories, and check out any new stories she puts up as she goes. So let's see what we've got to read. The next one. Alright, we'll read this. This is I Will Always Protect My Friends. Now, this is a shorter story, so keep that in mind. I'll go ahead and read another one, short one, after this, since it's so short. So let's get started. I will always protect my friends. I always told my friends I'd kill for them. I don't think they ever believed me. It's something you say for reassurance and as a joke, but I wasn't joking. My friends mean the world to me, and I would do anything for them. I think when I first said it, I did mean it as a joke, but then in the sophomore year of high school, Gemma came to school with a black eye. Frank was her first real boyfriend, and even though it had only been 3 months, she'd stopped talking to us and started wearing baggy clothes with long sleeves. When I caught her in the bathroom covering her bruises with makeup, I knew she wouldn't leave him. That was fine. She didn't have to. I knew it would hurt for a while, but it would be better for her, and her life would move on. I always figured having a mechanic for a dad wasn't a bad thing, and it only took 20 minutes of looking through his books to figure out how to disconnect a brake line. The bad thing, the school was sad, and it's not every day your star linebacker hits a tree at 60 miles an hour, but after about a month, things went back to normal. We had Gemma back in our friend circle, and she was safe. All was well. After leaving high school, we all went to the same university. It's a small town with a school there, so there really wasn't any point in leaving. It was then that Jessica started abusing drugs. It started with Adderall she got from someone in a neighboring dorm. She slowly started experimenting more and more and quickly delved into addiction. It wasn't easy, but slowly the dealers who trolled near campus started disappearing. It's so hard to make it look like they died different ways. There's always planned overdose, but that gets boring and their clients start getting worried. One I managed to make look like he hung himself. It's not hard to convince someone to step off a stool when you have a gun in their back. Another died of hypothermia when I tampered with his car locks and left him in there all night. Even with the temperatures below freezing, it took much longer than I expected, and I made a mental note to stay away from that method in the future. With her dealers going missing one by one, Jessica started going through withdrawals, and it wasn't hard to convince her to go to rehab. That was over a decade ago, and she's still clean, so I'm proud to say my plan worked. After we graduated, life progressed as it normally does, and Kimberly got married. Her husband, now he was a piece of work. He drank heavily, and while he never did hit her, he did find a floozy in the bar. HPV. He was willing to risk my friend getting cancer just so he could booze and get his dick wet. I couldn't let him hurt her. I couldn't let him make her sick. He was probably the easiest. I put on my tight black dress and red heels. I bought a wig and wore makeup. Being a plain Jane and a tomboy, no one ever recognized me. When they found him, the news said police suspected that he had gotten a little drunk and attacked a working girl who fought back. She managed to cut him from groin to gullet, and a little pride and joy happened to be missing. Truth be told, it was because I wasn't going to risk torture being some sick fantasy of him and him getting excited everywhere. What can I say? A girl's gotta do what a girl's gotta do. And that's why you're here. You see, friends don't take friends to the club and leave them alone. Friends don't drink so much that they pass out behind the wheel. Friends take care of their responsibility and drive sober when it's their turn to be a designated driver. Do you even remember what happened last night? Kelly is in the hospital. You hit that car so fast, her face hit the windshield, and now she's in a coma. But you were so drunk, your body didn't tense. So drunk, you walked away without a scratch. Friends protect friends. You were my friend, and I loved you, but I can't save you from your choices. Don't worry, though. I'll make sure they find your body. I'll even cry at your service, but like all the others, life will go on, and my friends will be safe. They won't even know it's me. Life's always been so tragic in our friend group. We always bounce back, and we always stay together. They never believed I would keep them safe, but I'll always be here to protect them. And get the next one. There's something horribly wrong with my son. He's 6 months old, and life started normally as most children's. My wife and I were absolutely thrilled when we found out she was pregnant. We spent months designing and creating his bedroom. We went to parenting classes and invested in the best monitoring and safety equipment we could afford. Looking back, we probably went a little overboard, but it was our first child, and how could we not? We had been trying to conceive for 4 years and had just about given up hope when he was conceived. My wife's very earthy. She prefers organic and natural products. She's not opposed to science or reason by any means, but she does prefer to live life as naturally as possible. Given this, it was natural that she chose a birthing center focused on natural births. The doula she worked with was a very bubbly, middle-aged Scottish woman. There was something about her personality. It would light up the darkest of situations, almost like she was the fire in the middle of a cold, dark winter. When the day finally came, we were packed and prepared as we could be for what lay in store. As the contractions started, we called the center and quickly started the 15-minute journey there. Between my wife grabbing my hand and my other hand white-knuckling the steering wheel, I was surprised I could grab the bags from the car when we got there. Anella, our doula, was waiting for us at the door. She quickly guided us to our rooms, and soon my wife was settled in and ready to give birth. After what seemed like an eternity, she was finally in active labor. She was once again crushing my hand as Anna guided her through breathing exercises and checking her progression. With one final squeeze of my hand and a lot of grunting and swearing, we could hear our son. He was crying loudly. I looked at Anella, and all the color from her face had drained. She clipped the cord and handed my son to me, running across the room in the same breath. She was flinging cabinets over and digging in every container she could find. Jesus, suffering Christ, where are they? What's wrong? Is he okay? I asked, staring at her. I looked down at my son, who seemed happy and healthy to me. What's wrong? What's wrong with my boy? Asked my wife. I quickly handed our son to her, feeling the rising sense of urgency. Are you daft in the head, lad? The bairns have been knocked by the wee folk. Anella yelled back at me. Glancing at my son, I saw no marks, just what looked to be some part of membrane from birth resting across his forehead and cheeks. The coal! The barns have been marked!" she yelled, finally finding what she was looking for. She turned around, revealing an arm full of herbs and an antique-looking pair of scissors. I rushed towards her. I didn't know what she was ranting about, but she wasn't going to get anywhere near my son with anything. I started yelling, and quickly several other duelists came running in the room. They grabbed her and quickly pulled her out of the room as the woman who ran the center stayed behind. I could hear Anella screaming from another room as the tall blonde woman spoke. "I'm so sorry that happened. We've called for an ambulance." For my son?" I asked worriedly. "No," she continued. "Your son's fine. We've called for Anella. Something's horribly wrong. She's never behaved like this in all her years here, and we're afraid she may be in the middle of some sort of medical emergency. It's the only thing that could explain her behavior." The rest of our stay there was largely uneventful, and in a few hours we were home. Shaken and still upset, but we were home with our brand new baby boy. For the next few weeks, life was completely normal. We named our son Rowan, and he was a bright, bowling child. Tiny smiles and inquisitive stares. He was perfect. Of course, we had those nights when neither of us slept because he was crying, but even sleep deprivation didn't dull the excitement he brought into our lives. It was when he was about 6 weeks old that the package arrived. It was small and wrapped in brown paper with our address delicately scrawled on it. My wife was with Rowan at his checkup, so I decided to open it. Hidden inside, I found a note that read, "I'm terribly sorry for my outburst when your son was born, but you have to understand he's been marked. He's in grave danger. You won't believe me now, but you will see soon enough. These scissors are for placing near his pillow. It will help ward the wee folk away. If he starts acting strangely, boil these eggshells and play this music. The wee folk love bagpipes, and the evil after your son will reveal itself. Please, trust me." It was signed Anella. I looked in the box, and it was filled to the brim with the items she described. I made a mental note to call the birthing center later and let them know she had absolutely lost her mind. I very carefully hid the box in the crawl space so my wife wouldn't find it and start to worry. I know I should have told her, but with a new baby, everything had already happened. I didn't want to add any stress to our lives. The next few months were completely normal. Our baby boy was lively, expressive, and loved watching anything with bright colors and noises. And then, one night, when we were sleeping, we heard shrieking through the baby monitor. And not just normal baby cries, but absolutely blood-curdling screams. I sat straight up and looked at the video monitor. There was this person holding my son. It wasn't just a person. It was this thin, dark figure holding my son. I ran from the room into his, and to my surprise, there was no one there. I started searching the room as my wife rushed in. There was absolutely no one in the room. The window was open, and the curtains lightly fluttering in the breeze, and in our crib laid our son. He was quiet, his eyes wide, and he just laid there staring at us. My wife grabbed him and held him to her chest as I searched the rest of the house. What was so strange is both our bedrooms are on the second story. There's absolutely no access from the outside. All of the doors were locked. There was nowhere this figure could have come from, and nowhere they could have went without me noticing them. I called the police just to be safe, and showed them the recording from the monitor. They, like me, found nothing. We got a hotel room that night. We were shaken, and I was not going to risk that person, that thing, coming back to our home before I had a chance to change all the locks. It was over the next few days we noticed a change in Rowan. His brilliant red hair started falling out in clumps, and a dark black fuzz was replacing it. His once emerald green eyes started fading into a dull blue. I've heard that babies' appearances can change as they go, but I never expected anything so quick or drastic. The oddest thing was his behavior. He'd gone from a bright and bubbly child to a solemn and quiet one. He was almost robotic. He no longer enjoyed watching things or interacting with us. In fact, he much preferred we leave him well alone. Anytime we came near him, he would start screaming and clawing at us. If you'd never been around a baby, their fingernails are basically like tiny razor blades. During one triad, when my wife went to change his diaper, he landed 3 vicious claw marks across her cheeks. We called doctors and made appointments and even visited child psychologists. And every time we went, he acted like a normal child. Everything he used to be would come bubbling out of him at the sight of a stranger, but the moment we got him back home, he was back to being cold and quiet. We didn't know what to do. After the latest appointment, my wife and I sat in the living room, watching the TV in silence with Rowan in his pack-and-play. While flipping through the channels, we stopped on a documentary about Scottish culture. They were highlighting stories about fairies and their effect in Scottish culture when Rowan just stood up in his pack-and-play, not climbing the edge like a normal child, just stood like he had been walking for years, and then he started screaming. My wife and I were shocked, but she ran to him as this was his first display of emotion in weeks. She grabbed him and whisked him upstairs to his room when the quiet crying suddenly stopped. When she came downstairs, she said that as soon as they got in her room, his emotions just went deadpan. We went to bed that night. I lay there awake just thinking about all the things that had happened. The strange figure and Ella's warnings all swirling in my head. And that's when I decided to get the box out. My wife's had appointments the next day, and it would give me a chance to be alone with my son. As soon as my wife had kissed me goodbye and locked the door, I ran to where I had hidden the box. Pulling it out carefully, I examined its contents. Scissors, eggshells, and a CD laid out before me. Unsure of what to do, I took everything with me to my son's room and read the note. Carefully, I grabbed the scissors, setting the note down, and placed them near the pillow in my son's crib. No sooner had I turned around than the scissors went flying by my head, missing my ear by centimeters. When I looked back, my son stood in the middle of his crib with an enraged look on his face. I ran downstairs and grabbed our electric kettle. I brought it to his room as well, and then started tossing the eggshells in the hot water.
That won't work, Dad. It's been too long, and no one would believe you.
A demonic voice came from behind me. I looked, and my son was no longer in his crib, but standing right behind me.
You see, Dad, times have changed. We are not the wee folk we once were. That old Scottish bitch has nothing that can stop us. Rowan, as you called him, he's gone now. And I'm here, so let's just make our time together easy. I don't imagine you have much left of it anyway.
I locked myself in my office until my wife got home. Knowing she wouldn't believe me, I once again pulled up the video feed from the monitors. We don't know what to do. She's been acting as normally as she can around that thing, but he knows. He just sits there, watching us. We put him to bed like we normally would. I showed my wife the note, and the only thing we had left to try was the CD. We popped it in an old CD player we had and cracked the door. Bagpipes and traditional Scottish music quickly filled the room. But before long, we could hear the demonic voice singing along in a language we didn't understand. Great. So now our fucking demon child is set up for a career in singing. It was 3 nights ago. He's been singing every night since. My wife and I take the time he's singing to research, and Ella's right. And we should have listened. Over the last few days, we've learned that our baby, or what was our baby, is something called a changeling. They appear all over the world in different myths and legends, but the basics were always the same. Fairies of some sort steal a human baby for whatever reason and replace it with one of their own. The things Anella gave us that I ignored are supposed to protect the baby marked by fairies. The thing is, you only have so much time to get your child back before it comes one of them. We're too late. The singing just stopped, and I hear footsteps upstairs. My wife is in the office with me. Through all our research, we've learned the only way to get rid of a changeling is with fire. If you find this note, know we love you. This thing is dangerous, and we have to stop it. Nella, I'm sorry. We should have listened. We're going to make this right. We're going to fix this. We can't get our child back, but we can stop whatever this thing is. This note was recovered at 1:34 a.m. at the residence of Tom and Kimberly Johnson. It was found among the rubble of their burned home. It has been entered into evidence as part of the official arson investigation. 2 bodies were recovered, but that of their young son Rowan remains missing. And that was titled He Sings at Night. I think I forgot to mention that at the beginning, but that was the end of the story. I hope you all enjoyed the stream this evening. We're going to call it an evening at this point, I think. I hope you did enjoy these stories and you enjoyed the author as thoroughly as I have. She clearly has the talent. In case you've missed any part of the live stream or showed up late, I do leave the streams up on my channel. You can also direct friends and family to them to listen in case they are unable to make our visiting hours. We have finally reached the end of our time together this evening. Visiting hours are now over, and while I hope to see you all here again, perhaps I can convince you to be a permanent resident at the asylum. I am Beyond 5150, and I wish you all wonderful nightmares. Good night. Sleep well. And just ignore the scream.